Hi, this is Jennifer from Positively Learning, and today we're going to be talking about sensory paths or sensory walks. You may have seen this idea on Pinterest or in groups, and you were interested in putting it together for your own classroom or maybe even at home. So, I had the same idea and I started to incorporate this in my own resource room setting. And I learned a lot from the experience. First of all, it was awesome. It was definitely something I recommend, but I learned that there's a lot of tips and tricks along the way. And there's a lot more that you can get out of these cards too. I found a lot of different ways to use them. So that's what this video is all about. I'm hoping by the end, you'll have some ideas that you can put into place right away. If you have seen my videos before, you know I like to do kind of a unboxing approach where I just open up the resource and we walk through it together. I'm also going to be taking notes and I'm hoping to get at least 10 tips, 10 action steps that you can put into place right away. All right. Now, if you have any questions, please be sure to let me know. I will also be providing links down below so you can get a closer look. One thing I suggest is going to this link of the sensory walk path. There's 500 cards there, but what you also can do is click on that green button and view the preview and get a closer look. Okay, so when I look at this cover, this is what I was originally intending. And this is how we used it too, although we got a lot more use out of it than this. But what I was originally thinking of was setting up a structured movement activity for my students. And I didn't have a lot of space, and the space wasn't always guaranteed, which means like things moved around in the room. So I wanted it to be really mobile. So what I did is I created these cards and I would set them up like almost like a hopscotch game where students would move from one card to the next, performing the movements and following the directions and having a lot of fun. So that worked out really well, but you probably noticed there's 500 cards. So I got a little carried away. I realized pretty early on that with the space I had and the students I was working with, which was primarily like K through 2 grades, it was best if you're going to use this. Oops, if you were going to use this traditional sensory walk path approach, it's best to use about 10 to 12 cards. Now, you may have tons more space, but 10 to 12 is about enough for my students. I feel like if we had gone like to 20 cards or something much higher, they might have like lost a little bit of their impulse control as they went, like maybe gotten a little silly and so on. But 10 to 12 is like just right. They could be successful, they were having fun, they were following directions, we were keeping ourselves together. So that's what I would recommend. And the other thing I learned right away was it was really helpful to vary the movement. So for example, a lot of these cards indicate like a gross motor movement. I would not suggest like putting high energy movements right in a row, like run, jump, hop. I would instead like stagger them or alternate them, like run, touch your toes, walk, reach up high, take a deep breath, spin, in different types of movement. Students are still having fun, they're still following directions, they're still getting that sensory output, but you're not like causing like we don't want to be sweating, right? We want to be having fun with this. So what I want to do is I want to open up the packet and walk through it with you. Okay, so I mentioned already I got really carried away and I made 500 cards, but they are very different from each other. So I think it's going to make sense as I show you. Now, the very first thing I started to do after I realized, like, that's a lot of cards, I started to put together some structured movement paths that you could follow. And so I made some visual maps by pulling out different cards and setting them up in ways that, like, I knew were going to be successful. Like, for example, varying that types of movement. So there's some examples here, and I'm going to show you them. These are all the different themes I made, but you could make so much more. You really could. And once you see the cards, you're probably already going to come up with some themes that would be perfect for your classroom. But I'm providing some here so you have pretty much all the holidays covered, and you could do like every month of the school year. The next page in this packet does show you how they're all organized. And there are a lot of different types of cards that you can pull from. They're not just movement cards, there's a lot of other tasks in between. All right. So now here's an idea of what the visual maps look like. And I have one for calming. And so walking through this one, this blue arrow box right here, that's where your student would begin. And this is just an example. You can lay this out any way that works for you. But students would start there and move to this card. Then they would move to this yoga pose, the arrows indicating the direction. These are finger tracing cards, which I will talk more about in a moment. More poses, the beautiful flower, directions, and so on. I love the speed limit to calm down, a deep breathing card as we go, and so on. Now, these flower cards and this visual map, those are indicating like footpaths, like stepping stones almost. So students would like step from the arrow card to this card. Then they would step from this card to this card, follow the direction, and so on. So these visual maps give you an idea of putting together some themed walks. Now, you don't have to do that. You can be choosing them based on your students' needs. Maybe you're working with occupational therapy. Maybe your students have some strengths. Maybe they have areas of concern. Maybe your space is really limited. So these are visual themes. I should say, these are visual maps, and they are by theme. But you might have another way that you want to choose your cards, and that is totally fine. You know your students best. All right, but there are enough of them there. This is the example of the energizing. Then we start moving through some of the holidays. I want to show you our favorite one. This one right here. The zoo one was the favorite. And I love the environmental print with the street signs. My students absolutely adored the animal movements. And then you can see that the directional paths and so on. The paw prints that we're following as we move along. That one's really, really fun. Okay. And then we have a pond one where students like crossing the log and hopping on lily pads. Just a lot of fun. Those animal movements are a favorite. Right, so after the visual maps, we get into the movement cards. The movement cards are all in black ink to be printed out on assorted colors. So you can use paper or cardstock. I do recommend laminating. You don't have to, but I recommend it because if I'm going to print and get these prepared, I don't mind doing it, but I only want to do it once. And I want to be able to use it year after year. So that is why I recommend laminating. Now, many teachers, and I know I've seen this on Pinterest, they're taping these, like using adhesive to put these on the floor for the path. I will tell you, I did not do that. You don't have to do that. It's up to you. You could just put them on the carpet. You could put them on the floor. You can put them on tables. You can have them go along a wall. Where students are following stopping and performing the movements as they walk down that alongside the wall. You don't have to tape them to the floor. That would be just up to you. I found because I was only using 10 to 12 cards, and because there were so many cards I still wanted to use, that I didn't want to tape them because I wanted to be able to switch them out very easily. Okay, this first set of cards are very calm. These are a lot of poses. If I was choosing to set up a calming walk path, which might be something you're very interested in, I would probably stagger these or alternate them by standing poses and lying down poses. That's one way to provide some variety, or maybe just what's appropriate to your students would be to do all standing or all lying down. That is up to you. Notice that these are all without text. You're going to see some with text in a little bit. I have some different levels of accessibility. In fact, I'll add that to our list right now. We have the goal, of course, is independence, right? That's our goal in everything. And so you're going to see some cards that are picture only, see some cards that are text only, and see some that are picture and text. And you're welcome to use any of them, all of them combined, whatever works for you. But they're all in there so that you have that choice. So these are more of the poses. Students love this character. This artwork is by Sarah Pecorino, and my students are just obsessed with this character. I love these right here, the deep breathing. These would be excellent to use in a calming corner. So imagine if you had a calming corner in your resource room and you were able to put a path there. Or if you didn't have room to set them up on the path or you wanted your student to be like a little bit more calmer, you could just set these up, keep cards on a book ring. And they could just like flip through the cards. If you're hole punching in the top left-hand corner, your students could just flip the cards. And that would be like the deep breathing, using some of the yoga poses. Oops. And I have some that have some finger paths. I'll show you those in a moment, but that could also be very calming. So these would be great for a calming corner. There's our deep breathing. All right. After these yoga poses, we get into a little bit less structured poses, but still some really fun movements. Here they are. And because these are less structured, I did provide some movement suggestions. I didn't find that I needed to provide suggestions for my students. I'm looking at the card and I'm kind of like, oh, what should we do? Just reach up our arms? But my students, they didn't struggle with that. They were looking at the card like, of course I'm going to do that. They knew what to do, but I did put some suggestions on the side for you. Of course, this text won't be there when you prepare these cards, but they're there if you're picking and choosing when you're setting it up initially. Notice that these cards are 4 by 6 inch. That is on purpose so that they can be easily stored in those colorful photo storage boxes if you want. Okay, moving into some different movements, some that are not gross motor as much, like some stationary movements like clapping your hands and snapping your fingers. And then some that are just more of the like body percussion, like stomping and tapping. Some more movement cards without text for your students to follow. You can see some of them are very stationary, some of them are much more energetic. So you're alternating those, finding out what your students are really excelling with, picking and choosing. And then we get to the animal cards. Now, these animal cards, there's a bunch of them in here. I used these in the sensory path, but I also used them just as brain break cards. These were so much fun. These were just a favorite. And so when we use them as brain break cards, that way we could like use them in a small group or a whole group together. So again, I had this on a book ring and we're just displaying one card at a time, having fun with that movement. So that's an idea with that. The sensory walk path is more of a individual activity that you're doing, on your own. One student at a time is moving through the walk path. So, you can have more than one student on the path, but they're in different cards. They're in different places. So the brain breaks are more of whole or small group activity. All right, so these animal cards are there. So much fun. If you just want to print a set out to keep separated so that you have those available. Okay, and then we have some less structured, and these are like high to low movements. We're starting like reaching up high, then we're on our shoulders, then we're moving down all the way down to ground. Again, these could be used for brain breaks as well. After the picture cards, we get into text cards. I'm going to scroll pretty quickly through these. Some of them are very calming, some of them are very active. This is my favorite one, stuck in slime. That is a really cute one. Imagine if you were printing that out on bright green cards, and there's some slime cards that I'll show you in a moment, and that would just be a whole slime theme. Your students would love that. Superhero flying, I just saw that go by, walking on a tightrope. Okay, and then there are some cards that have both the picture and the text. So you can choose what's going to work best for your students. All right, after these movement cards, we are moving into more like fitness style cards. Again, the text has disappeared, so these are a little more open-ended. I don't think your students are going to need any help deciphering what the movement is, but it does leave it open-ended if you want to assign a specific movement to it. But that's an idea, some body percussion cards. Okay, and now we're moving into these. So far, what we've been talking about is like whole body movement. But if you did not want to set up a walk path, one other idea is to set up a sensory station. And a sensory station can be where these cards are all displayed on a wall, whether you have them like in a path on the wall that's like kind of going zigzagging or going left to right. If you have a dry erase board, one of those older ones that have the ledge where you put the markers on the bottom, you can have cards displayed there. You could put these on carpet squares, so students are moving from one square to the next. You could even put these on just tables. And so the idea is a sensory station, and students are doing performing tasks, and these would be tasks that are more stationary, and there are some in here that are more like just hands. So one example is palm presses. We have these fingerprint cards I'm going to show you. We have a high five card where students can like just be staying at that station and doing the different motions that the cards indicate. We saw clap and snap, and then like left hand and right hand. So these are the fingerprint cards that you could have there where they're pressing their hand or their thumb against it. Whoops. And then we have some footpath cards, left, right foot together, and then left hand, right hand together. So students are like pushing up against the wall. That is definitely a sensory output. And then we get into our footpaths. Now, I talked earlier about those flower cards we saw on the calming visual map. These footpaths are kind of the same idea. They're showing some are like left, some are right. They're showing the direction that students are moving in, like when they're hopping from one to the next. Let me show you some more. There's some dinosaur ones. This one. This one is probably the favorite one that my students used. So if I go back to this cover, you can see those paw prints in there. So that's just a student is like starting at the go, moving, striking a pose, moving, and so on. So these are footpaths. And what's nice about these cards, and I'm just going to put like an example, the paw print. What's nice about these cards is you could use them for other things besides the sensory walk path. You can use around school to indicate direction. So for example, I don't know if you've ever seen them like where the paw prints are leading to the classroom door or exiting the classroom door, like if you have your students line up, you can use them for things like that as well. That is super useful. We're only halfway through these cards. There's still so much more to go. Lily pads that we're jumping to, a log that we're crossing. And then here's some extra cards. These are more for like if you're building themes, like if you want to do a detective theme, the slime theme, sports, and so on. So all of these picture cards, I'm going to go through them pretty quickly. We move from some common pictures and some themed pictures to some holiday pictures. And those are just using them for footpaths. So students would be stepping on the card to get to the next one. These are palm presses. You could use them as footpaths as well, but these would be a great one to display on the wall that students are using. And then we get into all of these arrows. And you can see there's some straight arrows, there's some curvy zigzags, there's some environmental print with the street signs showing arrows. I use arrows for everything. So I would recommend with these arrow cards showing direction of movement, I would recommend alternating these with the movement cards. So for example, you would start with like the go, then you'd see a footpath or arrow, then a movement, then maybe another arrow, and then a movement. And so you're staggering them, and that is really helpful. And speaking of that, I had heard from another teacher, and I thought this was such a brilliant idea. She's using these sensory walk paths as indoor recess. And she said it is great to have your students up movement, getting their wiggles out, getting their sensory, but they're also staying socially distant. So for example, if you set up the path and you had these arrow cards, every other card, you could have a student start the path. They're moving in the direction of the cards, performing the movements as they go, and say they get to like the fourth card. Then another student can start the path, and then it can keep on going. So your students have a stagger start. And whether you're doing the social distance or not, it's actually just, I think, a great idea anyway for boundaries and like keeping that safe space around us as we're moving. That is a great idea. So thank you to that teacher. And so the arrow cards can be used for that. They can show a change in the movement direction. And then after the arrow cards, or movement cards, we get to some of the start and finish cards. So you could use the text cards, you can use the environmental print with the street signs. I love that walk, don't walk, and so on. Open and close, do not enter. Oh my goodness. All right. And then the speed limits. I have to say, these are just for fun. I never use the fast ones. I did use the slow ones, though, for sure. And there's just some fun cards for directions. Okay, next set of cards is positive affirmation. So I did sprinkle these. I would put like one or two into every path. So my students are very familiar with like growth mindset statements, and I liked to sprinkle these in as they go. And what I also used is I didn't even just use these for the sensory walk. I used these at other times of the day as positive affirmation cards. So, for example, you could print these out, prepare them, sprinkle a few into your sensory walks, and you could also keep these like an example at your small group. Oh, wow. Group table and using them for feedback. I'm always really aware of the teacher talk ratio, and I'm always trying to find ways to reduce mine because I want my students to grow in independence. I don't want them to be dependent on the feedback from me as well. However, I still want to provide it, right? Especially like when great things are happening. So these positive affirmation cards are just a great way that I can just display these and just like show them the card, flip to the new card. I usually get like a nice nod or a smile. They're pretty happy to see it, but I'm not distracting them from their work. I'm not taking them away. I'm not making it about me. It stays on them, and that's what we want. Right, so there's the affirmation cards. You can put these on the sensory path. You can post these as like little mini statements. These can go into the calming corner. It's up to you. And then we move into some of the deep breathing cards. I absolutely love these. These are visual cards. They give you the countdown 5 to 1. We always talk about like blowing on hot tea or soup, blowing bubbles, blowing a pinwheel, a dandelion, all the seeds, the wind blows. And so these would be fantastic. You could put these into like the bulletin board, the wall version, sensory station. You could put them into your walk path, but I definitely would put them into a calming corner. So those deep breathing cards. And in addition to the deep breathing, we did a lot of breathing while we followed these finger paths. So again, this could be just a fun fine motor active activity, or you could combine these with the breathing practices, where students are taking their one finger and tracing these paths. If they were doing this on the sensory walk along the path, they would just stop and they could trace in the air, or they could trace right onto the card, but there are several of those. And then the last type of card included in the set are more academic tasks, and they are completely optional. I found that I really liked them. I thought they were great, and my students also really liked them. Now, I did work, like, say, for example, if I was working with first graders, these are number and alphabet tasks, and that was very easy for them to do independently. I shouldn't say very easy, but they were successful with it. So take that with a grain of salt. This isn't like instructional time. This is definitely independent time. But I do have where they're counting, and then I do have it with the alphabet. I have lots of these shapes. You could use these as like the footpaths, the way we saw the pictures earlier, or you could use these like in a sensory station where they're finger tracing the different shapes. And then I have them finger tracing the numbers using tally marks. So this is counting, then the numerals. So you could have them match that. They could see the numerals on their path. They could trace the number in the air. Then they could like hop 6 times, or whatever it indicates, whatever you want it to be. And then we have the alphabet. We have all the lowercase and the uppercase in that traceable picture representation. And that takes us to the end of the packet. So let's go back to our list. There is so much going on. We talked about, like, we started off with that traditional walk path, but then we saw that there's so many more ways as brain breaks and calming corners and a sensory station, indoor recess, different things like that. Let me catch up on our list. We have different academic tasks. One thing I do want to also mention with these 500 cards, and of course, you can print one page more than once or skip another page, whatever works for you. But what you could do is set up that traditional walk path and then take those individual cards or all those leftover cards and make individual student sets. Maybe you're choosing cards that you know students are going to benefit from, like the deep breathing or balancing on one foot. Or maybe you're picking out some of their favorite ones. And this could be like a reinforcement, a break that they had earned, whatever you want it to be. But you have enough cards there that you could be creating different sets. And I would probably use those on the book ring or in the photo storage boxes that they could have. And this would be great, like if you're working with a paraprofessional, they could like grab the ring and go and have like this could be like movement on the go. So lots of great ideas to get that energy out and to customize for the students that we are working with. Please let me know if you have any questions or any ideas to add to this list. What I'm going to do below is link up a blog post that is all about the sensory walk path. And then I'm going to also make sure I link to this packet. You can go ahead and check it out. And then remember, hitting that green preview button is going to give you some more information and a closer look at the cards. And as always, if these are helpful for you, these kind of unboxing of teacher resources, please be sure to hit subscribe so that you don't miss a single one. There's many more on the way. All right, thanks so much.